Hi, this is Bruce Buffer, your voice of the Octagon, and you're listening to MMA Mental.
I am now joined by Sean O'Connell. Sean is coming off a win over Matt Van Buren, taking his record to 16-6 and his UFC record to 1-2. Thank you very much for joining me. Congratulations on picking up your first UFC victory.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. It feels really good to get that first UFC win. It's a goal that a lot of fighters will understand. You know, I've worked for a long time. Nice little milestone to reach, and looking forward to the next one.
Now, you were facing Matt Van Buren, who had quite a good showing on the Ultimate Fighter Season 19. What were your views on him as an opponent?
Honestly, you know, looking back on the fight now and my preparation for it and some of those things, I think I underestimated Matt. His finale fight was lackluster, so to speak, and he did have some impressive fights in the house, but what I had seen of him on tape, he didn't use his length as well in a lot of those previous fights. Even his old fights you can find on YouTube, he just hadn't used, I think, his God-given physical tools as well as he did against me. Maybe it was my style and his matching up that allowed him to look better than he did in some previous fights. But you know, I don't know if I underestimated him or if I just came out sluggish or whatever it was. I didn't expect that he'd give me a beating for a round and a half or 2 rounds before I was able to get things figured out.
Now, you were coming off 2 losses. Did you feel any added pressure going into this fight?
Absolutely. I mean, every UFC fan and every UFC fighter especially knows that 3 in a row is the death knell for a UFC career very often, more often than not. And I was nervous going in off of my first loss. When I fought Gian Vellante in New Zealand, first of all, I feel like I won that fight. We got a fight of the night bonus, and the UFC brass seemed happy with the performance, but I think I won that fight and that it was a poor judge's decision, so that did not sit well with me, that I not only was 0-2 to start my UFC career, but that I had no job security and felt like I was robbed of that and of my win bonus and all those things by a poor decision. Now that was a fun fight, that was a great fight, and I know it was a close fight, but I've watched that thing probably 50 times over, and I still don't know how the judges scored it, but I'm not exactly an unbiased observer, of course. I'm generally usually rooting for myself to win, even when I watch a fight I already know the result of. So, yeah, I came into the Van Buren fight knowing that it was pretty much a do-or-die situation, which, you know, by extension meant that sitting on that stool between round 2 and round 3, I was really in dire straits because things weren't going overly well in the early part of that fight, and I needed to make up some ground. And my corner, Jeremy Horn, who's a legend in the sport, as you know, and an absolute master, he doesn't joke with you. He doesn't mess around. He said, "Listen, you need to go out and get a finish. Don't leave your destiny up to anybody else." So there's a lot of urgency going into that 3rd round, and I'm very happy I was able to accomplish the goal that we had set out.
Now, taking it back a little bit then, you did touch on this. I mean, at the start of the fight, Van Buren started quite well. He landed with some big kicks and big knees to the body. Did you find it difficult at the start to deal with his range?
Yeah, I did. You know, in past fights, he's thrown a lot of low kicks and kind of a lazy jab and set everything up off a lazy jab, which I was very prepared to deal with and thought that I could take advantage of. And he came in against me and was throwing knees from range and then trying to clinch a knee and throwing a lot more kicks high or to the body, which was just a bit of a different look. Obviously nothing I haven't seen in training, but, you know, for whatever reason I didn't respond to it very well in the first or second rounds, and it made his range a little bit more difficult for me to handle. I think it frustrated me early and caused me to get out of my head movement, and my footwork got a little bit sloppy, and I was maybe pressing a little hard to land a big punch when I should have been setting things up a little bit better.
Now, you certainly found your range a lot better in round 2, and you did wobble Van Buren with a big punch. Did you feel close to finishing the fight at that stage? You know,
I did. I felt like, first of all, I feel like I've got as good a punching power as pretty much anybody in the division, and if I land 2 or 3 hooks on you, you're probably going to go down, but I didn't want to rush it. I had, at that point, already sustained some damage to my ribs from taking those knees from range, and late in the first round, he also hit kind of a long, straight right hand on me that just absolutely crushed my left eyeball. It had me seeing double, and the eyeball itself, not necessarily the socket, but the eyeball itself took like all of the punch and just squished it in there. So I didn't want to run into anything by rushing and lunging in, and as he was wobbled, I wanted to be a little bit more patient. To his credit, he did a great job of keeping his range and circling away from me and making sure that I wasn't able to jump on that. In hindsight, maybe I could have done a better job of finding that balance between urgency and power, but at the end of the day, I got the result I wanted, even if it came an extra round late.
Now, going into the third round then, did you feel it was a round each?
Well, I wasn't sure. I felt a lot better about the second round than I felt about the first round, but I went in with the mentality that I was down 2-0 because I wanted to get a finish, and like I said, the judges I don't think did me any favors in my fight in New Zealand, and I didn't want to leave it in their hands ever again. I hope for the rest of my UFC career I never leave it in the hands of the judges, and I know that's cliche, but it's absolutely true. You know, that's the one area of our sport that I think is really in need of some change and some uniformity, because judges' decisions, whether it's me fighting or Benson Henderson or anybody else, I think very often there's some inexplicable decisions, and more often than it should be, especially at the UFC level. I don't know where the commissions are pulling judges from. I don't know how that's happening, but there needs to be more uniformity in the scoring, and I did not want to leave it in the hands of anybody else, especially when it was, like we've talked about before, it was that kind of do-or-die scenario where I needed to get a win or potentially be cut.
Going a bit off topic then, I will come back to the fight, of course, but I mean, there was some really dodgy decisions that night, and you mentioned Henderson, but I don't even think that was the worst decision. What did you think to the Spencer Pendred decision?
I'm sorry, which one?
Did you get to see the main fight on the prelim, so Sean Spencer versus Cathal Pendred?
Oh, I did, yeah. I watched that. I had a bunch of family who came to watch the fight in Boston, and so I exited the locker room and went up and watched from the stands and just was a spectator for the rest of the night. And I'm actually a big Pendred fan. I'm a fan of all the Irish fighters, I guess, because of my own deep heritage. But I felt like that was just a kind of a hometown decision. It was a very Irish crowd, and it was a very Boston is a very Irish city, and I felt that as much as I like Pendred, I don't think he did enough to really win that fight. And I don't know how you can go back and look at the stats on that fight, and how you can go back and rewatch it and not get it right, 9 times out of 10. And it's just really unfortunate and inexplicable that when it matters most, the judges are getting it wrong so often. So I think the UFC, though, will acknowledge that, and they're not going to cut or punish a fighter for losing just appallingly bad decisions like that.
So going back to your fight then, so I mean in the third round you definitely turned up the heat, and of course you forced the referee to stop the fight. Can you talk us through the end of the fight?
Yeah, so my corner kept telling me, my left hook is my best punch, and they kept telling me, you've got to set it up, you got to open it up somehow, and against a much longer fighter like Matt, you've got to often do that with, finishing your combination with that hook rather than in previous fights I've had some success with kind of a lunging lead hook, and that just doesn't work against a tall fighter. So we started going back to the kind of the overhand right, or I wish it was a straight right, but let's be honest, it's kind of a sloppy overhand right. The overhand right, and trying to score with the hook. So started searching for that. I lunged in too deep once, and that landed a really good knee, the best knee of the entire fight, on kind of my left side of my rib cage. I don't think I game-faced it very well. I stepped back and was like, man, you got to stop taking those knees, and eventually did land kind of a big overhand that actually was more forearm than fist, because he lunged in closer than I thought he would, and then was able to put him down initially with that hook, and he was kind of in zombie mode. His body was standing up. He was he had that far off look in his face. He didn't really know what was going on. I spoke with him in the locker room afterward, and he didn't recall standing up after being knocked down, so he was just on autopilot there. But once I knocked him down, I knew that it was over. I just needed to keep pouring it on until he was all the way unconscious and his body couldn't move anymore, or until the referee had seen that he had enough, and the referee saw that.
I mean, yeah, I was going to say, when the referee did stop in, I mean, it was definitely a good stoppage, because Van Buren was, like you said, he was out on his feet, but he was still standing when the fight was stopped, and it's not often we see that. So were you surprised when the referee stopped the fight?
I thought he probably could have given me 2 or 3 more shots. Van Buren had kind of squirted out to his right along the cage, and I was still almost parallel with him, meaning way too close to the cage. I needed to be circled out back in front of him to generate really ideal power on those punches, but the referee was kind of on my left shoulder, sort of in the way of me doing that, and that's where he stopped the fight from. It would have taken, maybe 1 more, maybe 5 more, but I wasn't going to stop. So, yeah, good stoppage, like you said. Maybe it would have been better for the highlight reel if I was able to knock him all the way down flat on his face or something, but at the end of the day, when a guy's out, I don't feel a need to do any more damage than a referee finds appropriate, so I'm happy with the stoppage.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like about the sport. There's so much respect in the fight, and there's, like you said, there's no need to do the damage. You've done what you need to do. You've got the win. You don't need to do any more, do you?
Right, no, and, it's not one of those situations. He was out on his feet. He was still on his feet, like you said, but he wasn't protesting. I mean, even your natural sort of instinct as a fighter, as soon as you come back to consciousness, you automatically protest. You say, no, I'm fine, even when it's clear you weren't fine. And Matt is veteran enough and savvy enough to know that the fight was over, and I appreciate that about him as well, that, he put on a hell of a performance in the early goings, and when it swung my way, he wasn't a poor sport about it. In the locker room after, he was really cool about the whole scenario, and we shook hands again at the hotel before we left and celebrated the fact that we'd won the fight of the night bonus together. And that's something that might sound corny, but when you go through that with an opponent, you're kind of bonded a little bit more than just a typical fight. When you put on a performance that warrants a bonus together, or that people are going to be talking about later this year or maybe even next year, then you're kind of forever linked to that guy, even if it's just a slight connection. So it's kind of cool.
Absolutely, and it was definitely a worthy win. And I was going to say, you obviously were awarded Fight of the Night. I know you've been awarded Fight of the Night before, but it's not very often we see a prelim get a Fight of the Night. A lot of the time, the main event or the co-main event steal it, and there were some big fights on the uppercard, especially the likes of Henderson, Cerrone, of course, and McGregor and Seaver. How pleased were you, how surprised were you to get the Fight of the Night?
I was both surprised and pleased. It's huge for guys that are like Matt and myself, that are lower end on the notoriety scale and lower end on the pay scale. Getting that $50,000 bonus is absolutely massive, and it's much appreciated. And the fact that we were able to do it and able to, carve that little niche for ourselves on a big card with Cowboy Cerrone fighting on it. And, I thought that the Chiba versus Norman Park fight was going to be a lot more exciting. I looked at the card and I said, I'm going to have to get knockout of the night if I want a bonus, because there's just a bunch of really high-level fighters fighting other really high-level guys. Sometimes that's a recipe for really excellent competitive fights, and sometimes it's a recipe for sparring matches where guys are trying to outpoint one another and are overly strategic. And for better or worse, you'll probably never see that from me in a fight. I'm kind of a live by the sword, die by the sword kind of fighter. So I'm either going to be blowing snot bubbles and throwing as hard as I can, or I'm going to be laying on the canvas unconscious. There's no middle ground for me.
Well, it was certainly a worthy winner for Fight of the Night. Anyway, so it was fair to say it was quite a brutal fight. How did you feel after the fight? And you've already mentioned some injuries during it. So how are your ribs? How's your eye?
The eye's fine. The bumps and bruises are there. I don't look exactly as gorgeous today as I typically do. I've got a couple of black eyes, and my ribs are still a little bit sore. But it's funny how much that pain fades away when you take your win check to the bank and put that deposit in. It's all worth it to me. I love this sport. I love fighting. The training and the grind and the weight cutting and all that stuff. Some guys embrace all that and they love all of that, for me, that's a necessary evil, and the fight itself is my reward, and that's why I really enjoy this sport. So I'm willing to take the punishment associated with that to entertain the fans, and the bumps and bruises that I'm feeling today are just fine with me.
Well, you certainly entertained the fans. Now, after picking up your first UFC win, who would you like to face next?
Anybody that the UFC wants me to. And I know that's a cliche answer, but I'm not in a position as a fighter right now to be calling individuals out or to be telling Joe Silva, you need to give me a shot at this guy. I've got a long way to go before I'm legitimately climbing the ladder. I want them to put somebody in front of me that's willing to fight hard. And obviously, Vellante was willing to do that down in New Zealand 6 months ago, and Matt Van Buren was willing to do that this past Sunday. So just give me somebody who likes to bite down on his mouthpiece and fight, and we'll go out there and we'll put on an entertaining show. That's what I'm looking for.
Well, I really appreciate your time today, Sean, and like I say, congratulations on the win. But before we let you go, I just want to give you a chance to do any shout-outs. So anyone you want to thank, any sponsors, and also shout out your social media?
Yeah, please everybody follow me on Twitter at RealOCSports. I'm on Instagram also at RealOC_UFC. I want to thank everyone for my gym who got me ready, especially my coach, Jeremy Horn. Like I said, legend in the sport. We're out here in Salt Lake City, Utah. If anyone's ever traveling through, come down, train with us, spar with us, roll with us. We'd love to see you. That's Jeremy Horn's Elite Performance, if you want to Google that and look it up. All my sponsors, Rockwell Watches, Snap Daddy's Barbecue, the Siri Law Firm, Iridium Sports, Franchise Customs. The sport is changing with the whole sponsorship deal, as everyone knows. The new Reebok deal is going to take over everything, but I'm not going to forget the people that helped me get to where I'm at today by sponsoring me, really from the beginning. And the butt patch on my shorts is going to look very much different for me when that Reebok deal takes place or goes into effect, because Lumpy's downtown is a sports bar here in Salt Lake City that I used to work for, and they have sponsored me since my very, very first fight all the way back in 2007. So it's bittersweet for me to see those guys not get to be part of my so-called fight uniform, but the sport is growing, and I'm all right with that. So big thanks to everyone who's helped me get here.
Well, I really appreciate your time today, and I can't wait to see you step back in the cage again.
Thank you so much, and appreciate you having me on.